Do you feel more musician or writer these days, given you have gigs and also a lot of chats like this?
I'm not a writer. That was hard work.
Was it?
Yeah, because I didn't know what the fuck I was doing. So I think, no, God, much more musician. And actually more so now, because I think now with this band we're just playing, because we're all getting old and we might die soon, so we just feel like I just have to keep playing, otherwise that's it. So I actually feel more like a musician now than I did probably in Piroshka even, because it feels like it's occupying a lot more of my time.
Okay.
But
brilliant.
yeah, if I'd be a writer if I wrote another, but I probably need you need to. I think you need to have 3 to call yourself a writer.
Okay.
Really,
Is that official?
I think so.
Okay.
I think so.
Okay, great. Well, we will get into the book a little bit because I think it's a really important part of what you've been doing the last few years. And like I say, it's got brilliant reaction. And we'll have a chance for some Q&A from you guys interspersed as well. I wanted to take you back to the early days of Lush, if we can. Again, because of the relevance of this festival, it's a grassroots music festival. So I'm really intrigued to ask you about those early days of Lush, the grassroots music scene you were thrust into in the first year or two, playing around London, Camden, and then obviously off into the wider UK music scene. What are your kind of enduring memories of those early years?
I mean, I think in terms of like grassroots music, like all of it was grassroots. You know, my memory of the kind of 80s and 90s, so the 80s being a period where me and Emma were kind of going to see bands in London, and then the kind of, you know, probably formed Lush in kind of 88-ish, and I was at North London Poly. So, you know, basically you just had your major label bands, and that was the people who played at the Hammersmith Odeon and the Hammersmith Palais and had like money behind them. But pretty much everyone else was grassroots. It was all pubs and student gigs and little bands and, you know, the independent labels that were actual independent labels. So they didn't have the kind of, you know, huge money behind them. And I don't know, you know, you could pick any one of 30 venues in London and it would have all different bands playing. So that was just the kind of scene that we were released into. So all of those early Lush gigs, you know, we would rehearse and we'd be like so excited to be playing like a room this size. We're like, oh, we've got this gig in Brixton and we're first on out of 4 bands or something. But that was enough, you know. Got paid 20 quid or something, and it felt like just being part of something. So I don't, you know, I think all that kind of, you know, we're going to be playing Wembley Stadium kind of stuff, I think that came a bit later. Like, the time that we were starting a band, that was like a deeply uncool thing to say, you know.
Really?
And, well, yeah, because if bands got big and or went to a label, they sold out, you know.
Right.
And
yeah.
It was sort of quite anti-star. So that, once you go into the 90s and you've got that kind of, you know, let's face it, Oasis mentality, you know, fair play to them, but do you know what I mean? That back in the 80s, everyone would have just like gone, well, that makes you a prick, you know, like, do you know what I mean?
So the smallness was cool, kind of keeping
Well, it
at
was
that kind of
counterculture.
DIY
There was a lot of
level,
suspicion about the mainstream. You know, most of the people I know didn't even fucking watch Live Aid. Everyone goes, oh my God, where were you when Live Aid was on? Somewhere else, you know, and not in front of a telly.
Yeah.
And I think there was quite a mistrust of the major labels and that kind of success. It seemed to indicate that you'd done something to merit that kind of, you know, sort of weight behind you. And so, you know, the Smiths got loads of grief when they left Rough Trade, you know, sell out, you know, blah, blah, blah. To the point of, you know, I do get it that you'd get bands that would want to grow beyond that scene, but I sort of miss some of that healthy cynicism of, you know, the mainstream.
So then when, obviously, Lush progressed to be signed by 4AD, was that seen as there's kind of the ceiling of the smallness, if you see what I mean? That's it, because, you know, it's a recognised good label, but it's still fiercely independent, I suppose, is it?
Yeah, I think you know, I mean, you know, you can sit there and pick it apart and say that, well, you know, these labels got their funding from a major label, do you know what I mean? But I think because they whether it was rough trade or factory or, you know, creation and all of these things, they did have a kind of control over their roster, you know, and that sort of meant that there was people would buy records just because they were on factory. I did. You know, I thought, I don't know who the fuck the Stockholm Monsters are, but I'm just going to buy this because it's on, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think you had the same with 4AD. And so I think, you know, there was a sort of, and there was a trust in that's, you know, those labels would only sign stuff that was, you know, had some sort of merit, musical merit, rather than just looking at kind of commercial gain.
Yeah.
And, you know, and it sort of, I think it was quite weird for 4AD to sort of, because, you know, although the Cocteau Twins were now, you know, they seem like they were enormous, but they kind of weren't. You know, they did play, I remember seeing them at the ICA and places, they weren't huge. And it wasn't really till the Pixies came along, I think, that people were like, fuck me, there's this huge band on 4AD.
Yeah. I think with bands like My Bloody Valentine as well, I mean, they're seen as this enormously influential band now, but when they're actually active, you know, before the reunion and etc., the first time round, I mean, I went to see them in tiny venues.
Yeah.
There was no one there, and well, there were some people there, obviously, but there were, you know, it was pretty small fish, and they were, you know, barred from a lot of places for how loud they'd be and so forth. But I totally get you with 4AD. I think I definitely bought records just because it was on 4AD.
Yeah.
And it was
they looked
arty,
beautiful as
arty,
well.
yeah.
Yes.
But then as you got, so we're into like the early to mid 90s, and when I look back at that period in terms of music, it's just mad, isn't it? I mean, things change so quickly, scenes to, you know, call it that, came and went so quickly. I mean, Lush were like shoegaze and then wedged into Britpop, and
yeah, I think we had the scene that celebrates itself.
the
before
scene
that
that celebrates itself,
yeah.
the ligging scene and all that, yeah. It was, it felt like a different thing every
I mean,
week.
I think it was just a press invention, you know, and I sort of feel very double-edged about the press, because on the one hand, you know, you've got NME and Melody Maker, both owned by IPC. I don't know who Sounds was owned by, but that was another weekly kind of broadsheet. It was a sort of really active period for music magazines, and I think they had like, and then you had like Smash Hits and Record Mirror, and there's all sorts of stuff, do you know what I mean? And they were incredibly competitive with one another, NME and Melody Maker. I mean, to the point of, you know, it was like fucking really political, you know, but they would kind of, you know, vie with each other for bands, but it meant this like really rapid turnover, because you would, I mean, I get it, you know, they're trying to keep the readership up, so they would build these bands up like, oh my God, look at what you're missing out on, look at what we found, and they're amazing. So everyone would go, oh my God, I want to be part of that, and then they'd kind of knock them down, you know what I mean, and take kind of genuine pleasure in that. But it was just a turnover, but it wasn't much fun being the band, I have to say, but it did get you attention, and it, you know, people all over the world used to buy those magazines. And so I actually think, funny enough, when you say like you saw My Bloody Valentine, small venues, blah, 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 there's a point in the 90s where it all starts to shift and money starts to come in. And a lot of that money is actually from America. So when we signed to 4AD, you had to get the Cocteau Twins records on import in America, right? Around the time that we went to America. Same happened with Ride, I think, and Creation. They both got licensed by Warner Brothers and Reprise, and they got a fucking shitload of money, which meant that those bands could then tour America. And I think that you know, America suddenly, you know, after sort of being into like, you know, hair bands from, you know, LA, they were looking for the next big thing, and they kind of focused on, you know, English music. And so a lot of those bands suddenly started to do, you know, well, or Irish as well, U2 and blah, 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 do you know what I mean? So the focus shifted, so that actually there was quite a lot of money being flooded in, and that's when all those bands started to get much bigger and play much bigger places, and then you end up eventually with kind of Nirvana, and it's a real explosion. And then it just becomes the mainstream. What was, you know, alternative in America, you know, And I think that's why there's no fucking money now, because it became the mainstream. It wasn't being fed from the grassroots anymore.
Okay.
And it shifted to, well, I guess, you know, I don't know, people in their bedrooms, you know, doing acoustic versions of whatever songs. I don't want to slag anything off, because I genuinely don't care, you know. I just think that, you know, people bemoan the old days and go like, oh, you know, there was so much more music around. And I think, yeah, because there were more venues and there was a kind of established network of student gigs, you know. It's much easier to book a student gig if there's like one fucking DJ with a box of records, you know, rather than a band. So once that support starts to go, it's quite difficult to maintain. You know?
When you mentioned that just before we came upstairs then about those early days, you were booking to play a lot of the unis and polys, as it were, which I get, were you kind of implying, I guess that's not on the gig circuit so much these days. I mean, I don't see those places.
No, I think that kind of dried up, probably even after Lush split up, because I think Lush still played student gigs. You know, I don't know how many of you were students, but, you know, back in the kind of 80s and 90s, what I remember is that, you know, you had like an ENTS officer and they had like a grant and, you know, and there'd be, I don't know, certain bands that would constantly reappear but, you know, cheap beer, it's a night out. But I do think in the kind of sort of mid to late 90s, I just think, you know, probably because they had their budgets cut as well. And like I said, it's an awful lot cheaper to just put a DJ on than a whole fucking band with a drum kit and all of that requires. And then that was kind of gone. And all, you know, God, all the gigs I saw of the Smiths, you know, New Order, all of those bands who became massive, they all did that student gig circuit. So that was quite a blow when that went.
Yeah,
you know.
Yeah, that changes things massively, doesn't it? You mentioned there as well about when the money kind of kicked in and there was this transatlantic feel to things. I mean, Lush actually had spent a fair bit of time in America, like a few kind of tours over there. And there's one bit in the book that in particularly I found really absorbing was your Lollapalooza tour in '92, I think it was, which I mean, it's crazy. It's kind of, to me, it's like a microcosm of many bands in terms of you start off with this excitement and what's it going to be like, and then by the end it's kind of like you're watching a bit of a car crash, really, but you're kind of looking through your fingers at it. Do you know what I mean? It's like it becomes a little dysfunctional the further on it goes.
Well, that's the nature of it, I would say,
And then you look at like staging Lollapalooza, I don't know if it would happen now. It's like quite a crazy masochistic thing to do, isn't it? Like that, those kind of big egos and characters on the road for 2 months. And I imagine it was hard for Lush to fit in with a lot of those bands and characters, your Pearl Jam and your...
I mean, I tell you what, for a lot of those bands it was quite early on. So Pearl Jam had literally only so when they were booked to do Lollapalooza, which would have been like, I don't know, the autumn before the summer it happened, you know, that's why they were second on the bill. We were on first and then it was Pearl Jam, and in the interim 6 months is when they became like fucking massive globally. But fair play to them, they still insisted on going on second. Great for us, right? Because people are coming in to see them, clearly. Not so great for the Mary chain who went on after them. It was quite hard. But to be fair, they were going to have a miserable time anyway. So, Well, you know, there's a dourness, let's just say. Bless them. I'm very fond of them, but you know what I mean. And I think what was really great about that Lollapalooza was that it was actually quite anarchic. So I know what you mean about the ego. I mean, fuck me, yeah, the Chili Peppers had definitely egos. But Ministry were like fucking all over the place. I mean, I think Al just decided he wanted to bring as many people on that tour as possible. So there was about 20 people in their entourage, you know, 16 of whom were probably on stage. And even then he picked up a load of fucking dancers on the way, so that was even more people. I mean, I think there was like 5 people playing guitar or something. It was insane. And yeah, you know, a lot of the bands were actually quite, again, I think that a lot of those Seattle bands like Soundgarden and Pearl Jam, they had that kind of, that grungeness had that kind of anti-star thing. So it wasn't, and it was kind of pre the time of limos and private helicopters and all of that. So really it was only the Chili Peppers, and they're from LA, that's the kind of place it is. I think the sort of Seattle vibe was much more sort of, no, we reject that. So everyone was kind of quite mucking in together, and it was, it was really good fun. And there weren't these sort of, VIP areas and separate this, and it was only the second Lollapalooza, so everyone was on each other's buses and, crew and bands all mixed up and whatever. It was really good fun. I mean, there was it's a bit of an eye-opener, some of it. When you've been touring with Ride, who are lovely, right? But it's all very sort of, a little bit of weed or something. And fuck me, you go on this tour and it's like... there was some scenes,
you mentioned Red Hot Chili Peppers there, Anthony Kiedis, is that his name?
Yes.
So he doesn't come out too good in your book. He sounds like a bit of a rotter, really. But also,
to be honest, he wasn't horrible. He's just a bit of a wanker. I don't think he's aware of it himself. It wasn't like deliberate.
But kind of a not a modern attitude to women kind of thing.
I think he would think that he did have a modern attitude.
Really?
I think he thought, this is the thing that got me. I do think there's a kind of cultural thing as well. America, Britain, LA especially versus, London. But I think he thought, he was your classic kind of, the kind of guy who thinks that he's like, really into female power. Oh, I love strong women. You don't really. You like women who have their tits out, who look like they're striking a strong pose. But that's, and that was it didn't, the kind of, sort of, that's where that kind of, Americans don't have any sense of irony. Of course they do. But people like that don't, And I think he genuinely thought, every time he talked to me, he'd be really friendly. And I did think, God, that's nice. We're fucking nobodies. But it would be like talking about himself, talking about, like, every conversation was about sex. Every conversation could go like, this fizzy water's really nice. It's like a real stimulant. It's amazing. If you pour it on your naked breasts, it does. It's that kind of thing where you're like, oh, for fuck's sake, right?
Okay, I get the picture. So I guess broadly around that time, though, when it's something you talk about in your book, the attitudes to women were quite different to today, and particularly within the entertainment industry, and particularly within, I think, the music industry. And you talk about one in particular press photo shoot.
Oh God!
To get into,
the Dazed and Confused one. Yeah.
Was that reflective of the time? And I guess my main question is, looking back, the fact that it was kind of normalised to a degree, does that seem really shocking now in hindsight? Hopefully, the world's not a great place, but hopefully we've moved on in some respects.
Well, it wasn't normalised to me. I think that was a development. So, I'm always a bit suspicious when it's just that idea of like, oh my God, it was so bad back then. And I think, personally, it's just as bad now if you look if you look in certain places.
Okay.
I just don't think the world changes that much, right? I think that prior to, again, this was a thing about getting, dragging independent music into the mainstream, was that there's no way you would have asked like Belinda from the fucking Valentines or the Throwing Muses or whatever in the early 90s to, do a photo session in their bra or something. It would have been ridiculous, okay? And you could still have that. You could still have Transvision Vamp being very sexy and blah, 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 and go for it, if that's your thing. But it wasn't like a kind of blanket thing that everyone was expected to do. Well, by the time you got to the 90s with all that, or certainly kind of mid-90s with Loaded and, that kind of The Word and this sort of birth of that kind of TV of, Chris Evans and the celebration of the land. Now suddenly everybody's got to do that. Now you could be a musician and they're going like, well, obviously we want you to wear this, you know, and you're thinking, well, I'm not going to. And then you're like, difficult because you won't do it. But it's not, to me, it was like, no one asked me to do this before. No one's asking fucking Liz from the Cocktoes to do this. And it just takes something to shift for that to just be back again. And I would argue it's the same now. You know,
Okay,
I think people like to sit there and go, oh no, we live in different times. And I think, really? Because I think I see plenty of fucking, never mind the porn that fucking goes on, that seems to be totally acceptable. Do you know what I mean? I would question how many women and young girls going into any kind of modelling now aren't subjected to that kind of pressure. So I just think it goes in a different guise.
Are you talking within the music industry here, or the world at large, or both?
Just the world at large, because I think that's the point. It encroaches. You know, I think that you can, you know, the thing about grassroots is there's no money, but you have control, right? So if you want to go and play a gig in a place like this, you can do it in your fucking pants, or you can do it in a fur coat. It's up to you. Do you know what I mean? I was going to make you do something you don't want to do, but once you go into the mainstream, once they're interested, you will be, you know, then they'll start selecting who they want to promote, and then they'll set an agenda for what you have to do in order to get that. And that's the way the world works.
Yeah.
You know.
So specifically around that time, I think it was mid-90s, we had that whole Ladette thing. What was your take on that?
I thought it was, you know, there was a point where there was a sort of idea that it might be a celebration, that it was liberating girls from having to be these, you know, little dolly whatsits on top of Christmas trees or something, that you could, you know, you could drink pints and you could swear and you could go to the football, right, and that's now allowed. But it very quickly, I think, became like quite fetishised, where again, if you don't do that, right, now we don't want the kind of prom queen sort of, you know, very feminine girl. Now we want her to, so you know, the point is, it's not just celebrating people and giving them the breadth to be whatever they want to be, it's just creating another box. And, you know, and all of that was like, okay, great, you can swear, you can drink pints, you can go to the football, but you're going to have to do it in a bikini, right? Which wasn't part of the fucking deal. So, and I just think you're always having to fight that kind of stuff off. So I don't think, there were plenty of brilliant blokes who were in bands, who I worked with, who, you know, I would encounter, fans, you know, co-workers, whatever, absolutely fine. There's always going to be some dickheads, you know. But there were quite a lot of people who seemed really angry about a band with two girls in it getting any kind of success. And I do remember sort of arguing with someone, because he was like, oh, well, you only got that fucking Melody Maker cover because you're two birds, you know. And I was like, really?
Do you mean people in other bands saying?
Yeah, you know, there was you know, bands can be a bit, you know, sharp-elbowed with each other. But I remember someone saying that to me, and I thought, well, that's interesting, because when we didn't get on the cover, you said we didn't get on the cover because we're shit. So I can't really win this, can I, in any way? And I think some people are just, you know, I don't know, isn't that the way the world works? I mean, I think, you know, there's all sorts of problems, isn't there? Loads of people feel that all their problems are caused by, I mean, pick a fucking idiotic bigotry, do you know what I mean? It's always going to be someone's fault, and then you're angry with that person, you know what I mean? Yeah. But you hope that it moves on.
Sure. So I'm going to dive into specifically some bits around your book, which came out 2 years ago, called Fingers Crossed. If anyone hasn't got it, I think there are some copies for sale here. I'm sure Miki will sign it for you. What's been, I mean, from my perspective, it seems like it's been an amazing reaction to the book. Is that how it seemed to you, and is that what you were expecting when it was released?
I had a very low bar,
Oh, did
right?
you?
So
Yeah.
everything has been amazing. Yeah, because I just thought I was, it's not like I wrote the book and then had to look for a publisher. I was kind of asked to do it, and then I did think it was a ridiculous idea, but I just, COVID happened, and I thought, fuck, I need something to do. So no, I was really pleased, and I have absolutely flogged it to death. So anytime, any podcast, any fucking fancy, and I go, yeah, no problem.
And so in the process of writing it, and maybe also in talking about it at these kind of events afterwards, which you're kind of elaborating on the stories within, I suppose, all the time, what do you feel like you've learnt about yourself, like kind of having that revisit of your life? If anything.
I mean, I think there's a sort of relief. I do think when I was writing it, I thought, fuck, can I put this in? Like, what if it, I'm, especially in a kind of social media world where people go fucking nuts, do you know what I mean? And it kind of snowballs out of control, I did think, can I take this if it happens? What if someone picks up on something in the book, and how? So it did make me think about everything has to be quite defensible. Can't just put stuff in and not think about it. And in the process of thinking about it, you can see it. I mean, if you think about, if you were to write a book yourself, there's probably things that you think, the highs and the lows, and there's probably are things that, were upsetting, that you feel you want to put the experience, but it does make you, really focuses on the mind. It focuses the mind when you know that you could have someone who could, point the finger back at you, or, disagree and say, I was there, that's not how it happened, and it did make me really think about a lot of the things that had happened in my life with a kind of maybe more objectivity, which is probably therapy, isn't it? I mean, I don't really know, but I suspect that's part of it. So I think it was quite therapeutic in that way, because it's tempting to pick an episode where you feel particularly bruised and then want to kind of make someone the kind of perpetrator of that. But then when you really think about it, you kind of have to see the context. So I don't know, I thought it was quite therapeutic, actually.
Is there an element of, or a danger of kind of misremembering the past as well? We have our versions of things we carry in our heads, right? So do you have to do any kind of checking out and go speak to people and say, I think it happened like this. Is this true? Is this the truth?
I did to some degree. I mean, I did have a lot of diaries, and I'm a bit of a hoarder and an archivist, so I do think I had photos with all sorts of annotations. So there were things that would trigger a memory quite clearly. And again, the problem with the diary is, even though it might be accurate to the time, it's very solipsistic. It's your perspective, it's what you feel. But there were things that I asked people who were there, and I said, am I being really unfair, or is that kind of... And, people were kind of fine with it on the whole, but at the end of the day, it is your perspective. And I think you can try and balance that by adding some context and saying, well, this person was going through that at the time when they were doing... I mean, even when I talk about like Anthony Kiedis or fucking Graham Coxon or whoever, I do always say, like, these people are probably lovely to someone else, right? I just happen to have a sort of shitty 5 minutes or 9 weeks or whatever, with them, right? But I'm sure they're absolutely fabulous to other people, but, not everyone can like you. And so it's not, because I actually didn't want that. I didn't want to write a book where people would sort of pick it up and then suddenly it's on social media, oh my God, have you seen what this bloke did in this band? And I thought, I don't want to put someone in that position, because it's one fucking incident. I don't like seeing people crucified unless they've done something genuinely terrible, yeah, I don't know.
I mean, I think a big thing about the book from my perspective was that it wasn't actually, the music wasn't front and centre in a way. The music was almost like a backdrop, a landscape, and your life became front and centre, especially when there's pretty traumatic events you you talk about in there. There's abuse, there's the suicide of Chris, the drummer. I mean, those must have been particularly, I'm choosing my words carefully here, but therapeutic in a way to kind of go and revisit. And again, you're talking about them pretty regularly. So do they become, are you able to manage those events?
That was therapy. I mean, it was really difficult. It was really, I mean, in actual fact, I think talking about Chris, I do think I wrote quite a lot about, there was an awful lot of kind of fallout after Chris died, and a lot of memories that I have that are very clear. Some of it very positive in that lots of people coming together and, the discussions, but I kind of cut all that because I just think, there were certain things, like even writing about abuse, I could only write about what happened to me. And there's a danger when you get, if I started too much thinking and riffing through these ideas, which you do, of course you seek out why, how could Chris have done this, why did he do it, blah, blah, blah. The problem is I don't fucking know, and I'm not an expert, right? And I don't want to say something that someone else who's had that experience or knows more is going to go, well, that's fucking nonsense, you know what I mean? And is also irresponsible. So, I had to really rigidly keep it to what I thought and how I felt, because I think there's a responsibility about talking about those sort of things that stretches beyond what I'm capable of, But I think more things that were therapeutic were kind of slightly silly things, like, having a shit manager, for like several years and thinking, well, I guess that must have been partly our fault because we did fucking put up with him. Well, we did. Yeah. If it was so fucking shit, why did you... And it's not for want of being told. I have fucking loads of mates going, why are you working with that fucking wanker? He's all right,
So in terms of revisiting parts of your life of the book, which were, on the flip side of that I suppose, which were the most fun, which were gave you belly laughs when you were going over those the whole time?
I mean, I'll tell you what's quite difficult is, like, I've read, partly because I was writing this one, I read a few, and what I really noticed is there's a tendency to pick these, like, hilarious anecdotes, right, and keep saying how hilarious they are, and when you're reading them, actually not that fucking funny, right? Like, you had to be there, unless you're a really skilled writer, and some people are, they're like really skilled raconteurs, and it comes off the page, and it's genuinely like, mad or funny or whatever. And there were things that I wrote that I thought, I'll definitely put that in, kind of comes across a bit flat, and then it's quite difficult to make it also not sound a bit braggy, like, oh yeah, this hilarious thing happened when I was hanging out with, David Bowie or whatever the fuck, you know what I mean, pick your celebrity. And it doesn't quite work, So, and I don't think it's really my forte. The funny things that would happen were just quite silly, And I think on the whole, I was more interested in the nuances of being in a band. Like, I'm not interested in that kind of building up some sort of, ego image where I get it, like, it is part of being in a band, but it must be amazing, it must be so brilliant to do this. And you don't want to sound like ungrateful and go like, oh yeah, that's all right. But I think that, to me, the joy of being able to write a book is to let people have a window into exactly how it might have felt. That you could identify with that, how kind of out of your depth you might feel in a studio with Robin Guthrie, or how kind of cut off you might feel if you're on Lollapalooza, and the stupid decisions that you might make, the way you might fall out with someone who's ostensibly meant to be one of your best friends because you spend every fucking minute of the day together, So all of those things, I think that was the bit that I wanted to kind of get in the band parts, really.
Okay, great. Another big theme for me as I read the book was about how kind of nomadic your life has been for large chunks of it. Your childhood, you had your parents were in different parts of the world, and then you're into the band. It's obviously quite a nomadic kind of existence. I'm intrigued to know how that kind of post-band, or post the first part of Lush, if you like, when you settled into parenting yourself, how did all of that influence in your parenting style and family life and so
God, you'd probably have to ask my kids. I don't know how well I'd come out of that, actually. I mean, I did really enjoy, I think I always craved that kind of settledness. You know, I don't think, I liked touring and stuff, but it's nomadic, but you've got this unit of people. I'm not the person who would go off to South America and travel around for 6 months on my own and meet people and have those sort of adventures. So I always needed like that kind of band that surrounded it. And you know, effectively, yeah, you go on tour and you travel around, but you don't see anything. You see the inside of the venue. So it actually feels quite static in a funny way, you know what I mean? I think that the nomadicness of my childhood actually I found really difficult. You know, I hated being the new kid at school constantly. It really pissed me off. And I think the only bits where I can see that it had some sort of, like, it's quite funny right now, right? So we're touring, there's 3 of us in this fucking rented car, like packed in with the gear, and I'm sitting there with like amps here and I'm like holding the guitar up, you know, like this. And what it reminds me of is going to Hungary in that fucking car. I think, wow, this is why I can do this. Like, as I was trained at an early age to just sit in this tiny space. But I didn't really want, and I think that's partly why I didn't go to America with my mum. So I was fucking sick of it. I was like, no, I'm going to stay here. I've now got some friends. I've now got a scene that I've embedded myself in, and people that I know, and in bands, and you know, so I think I was always craving that as a solid, you know, kind of family environment, really. So I think having children even, I mean, I'm social, so I was bang into all the school stuff and the, you know, flipping burgers at the Huckings, going, oh God almighty, this is what Moose always says, like, when you write part 2, he says, I can't wait for you to write 2 and do the Gladstone Park governor's years, like, so that's a fucking sitcom in itself, I can tell you that, Jesus.
But was it quite nice having all that after the kind of craziness of the music industry?
I loved it. You know, when I got a job at IPC, and I had I remember doing the job interview, and Ron, who was the chief sub, going, do you not surely want this job? Like, do you not want to go back to it? And I was like, no, this is fucking great. Get up in the morning, I come into work, I leave at 6, and I don't have to fucking think about it. I don't have to lie there awake thinking, oh my God, have we sold enough records? Is Emma going to speak to me? Is Howard going to fuck everything up? You know, it's just like none of that anxiety. Just go to work, earn your money, fuck off. Brilliant.
And then, so you had getting on for 20 years, wasn't it, of that kind of life and the family life before the Lush reunion?
Yes.
2015, 16, around that time, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So what was the trigger for going back and doing the reunion? Tipped you over the edge.
I mean, to be honest, like Phil had been in the Mary chain after kind of, you know, the Lush split, and Emma had done Sing Sing. So they both kind of stayed in the music industry more. So I think Emma was working for an agent at one point. Anyway, they were kind of more in the industry. I just cut off completely. And Phil was touring with Mary, and I remember him there was some manager he met who suggested that Lush could do a reunion thing, and that was like in 2005, I think. And it would crop up now and again, and I'd sort of go, okay, well, let's have a look, and it would kind of fall through because there wasn't enough money, or, you know, I to be honest, I kind of didn't want to be the party pooper, so I'd sort of go, okay, well, maybe. And then it didn't happen. And I'm not going to lie, I would feel immense relief that it wasn't happening. And then I think with when it did finally happen, there was a lot more momentum behind it. There was, you know, I think because Slow Dive had become quite big, like it wasn't just getting together and doing a kind of all tomorrow's parties or something. It was like, you know, you had like a band like Slow Dive who had really made something of it and were going to South America and blah, blah, blah. So I think there were bands in the wake of that thought, oh, fucking hell, this is actually quite possible. So I did take a long time to think about it. I took about six months to make my mind up.
Wow, that is a long time thinking about it, yeah.
Yeah, no, I did, because not least because I had Moose going, do not do this.
Really?
Do not do this.
Really?
It will be a disaster. Yeah. I mean, primarily because of me and Emma. I think he could see that it was always going to, you know, we fell out kind of after Chris's death, not immediately after, but a few years after. There was a 5-year period we didn't talk to each other. And he was a bit like, look, you're talking to each other again, it's all settled, just don't fucking push that relationship to that point again where it can all fall apart, which it did. So, you know, and I get that, but I think it was, you know, Emma really did want it to happen. And I do think, despite the negatives, I think that I really enjoyed it. You know, it got me back into music. I wouldn't have done Paroshka without it. I wouldn't be doing this now. I wouldn't have written the book because I'd shut the door on music after Chris died. I didn't want to go back. You know, it really fucking pulled the rug from under me. So I just, you know, and I couldn't have gone back into it without Emma and Phil anyway, do you know what I mean? I wouldn't have just started up a band on my own. I wouldn't know what the fuck I was doing. So I am grateful for that because that's why I'm here now. So,
yeah, fantastic. Let's see if we want to open this up, I think. So where I'm rabbiting on. Yeah, questions, anybody?
This is where everyone starts looking at the ceiling.
I'm curious to know, I think you wrote in like 1983 you went to about 150 gigs that year or something like that.
Yes.
Are you a gig goer these days?
I mean, not as much. I tell you what, because I think, you know, once you've lost touch, and also I just don't have the same level of obsessiveness. I think in 1983, when I was 17, it was like everything. All I did was read through the music and listen to the top 100. I was a real geek, you know what I mean? Like lists of fucking bands and writing out lyrics, and you know what I mean? You're just totally immersed. And then when you're an adult, it's like you've got other things to do, you know what I mean? And then it's sort of quite difficult to get back into because I missed that obsessiveness of it. Like it's quite difficult to then be someone who's quite casual about music. But Moose has got a mate, Stuart, well he's my mate as well, but and basically when he turned 50, which was a couple of years ago, because he was like me and Moose and there's a couple of our friends who were all sort of from music, and Stuart was never really in it, and so what he did is he said, right, I'm going to be 50 this year, I'm going to go to 50 gigs. So we were literally like looking a bit like fuck, you know, like okay, they're playing at the Moth Club, let's just go. And it was a really good way to sort of get back in. And suddenly, you know, I mean, I didn't go to a lot of them because I was like, the kids were still, you know, I was doing a lot of, and it was a bit more of a boys' club thing, but I would go along with it. But, you know, Moose saw like Amel and the Sliffers in some fucking tiny place, and they're now doing like fucking Ali Pally and the Roundhouse, and there's all sorts of bands that they saw. And I did think, oh, that's kind of a revelation it's back. You know, it makes me feel really good that that's back, because there was a point in the 90s where I remember if you went to see a band and anyone was interested, within about 2 months, they were like on a major label and playing some hugely hyper-inflated venue. And I like the fact that now you can go and see, I mean, you know, something like this, you know, I noticed that, what's their name? Lance of the Lake played, but there was another guy, what was the fucking shit? I'm so bad with names, this is me senior. Yeah, there was another band.
Loose Articles?
Yes, Loose Articles, because we played with them.
Right, yeah.
And it's sort of quite nice. So now it feels like back to that kind of scene and that network where you can go and see bands and then they might be supporting someone or they might be going a bit higher. So I feel kind of way right back in my comfort zone, actually.
Cool. Anyone else? Just go for it.
you still have any connections with Willesden Green?
Well, I live very near Willesden. I never
right.
moved very far.
Right.
So I lived in Willesden, and then I moved, I think I lived in Kensal Rise, which isn't that far, and now I live in Dollis Hill,
Right.
which isn't that far either. And it's literally, I walk to the butchers in Willesden.
Yeah.
So.
How do you think it's changed then? We lived there for many, many years.
Oh, really?
Well,
bizarrely, I'm from there,
Oh.
and so all the references, you know, I get them all, like Spin It Records and everything, all that shop. And I've got a Hungarian dad. Okay, so I'm thinking, alright.
Wow.
So
we're not stalking you.
No, but I lived in Dartmouth Road. So
Oh my God.
Sorry, this is a bit of a like niche conversation. But yeah, so yeah, just because you're still in that area, aren't you? And so it's,
Yeah.
I just go back to visit Dad. So
Wow. But do you know what? It was quite an enclave.
yeah.
A lot of.
That's right.
I mean, Yugoslav as well at the time. Yugoslav, you know, Hungarians. Because there was quite a few East Europeans in that part of Kilburn and Willesden and that sort of area. Because there's that Czech club, isn't there?
Yeah. And Harrow as well and all that.
So there was a bit of a. Oh, that's interesting.
So I was getting all of the raps like, and that. Yeah, I remember that. So.
Oh, brilliant. I mean, I love Willesden. I mean, it's a bit of a shithole, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I quite like that about it.
Yeah.
There's sort of shops and things that haven't changed, which I think is quite rare for London.
Definitely.
I like the fact that it's not all
It still has an
Starbucks
identity, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, of sorts.
Yeah. So I don't mind that it's a bit down at heel, because it always was a bit, you know.
Exactly.
All the kind of old Irish geezers pissed out their minds on that park
they're
bench.
still
On the way here, we read that passage about the end of Britpop and about that the paragraph you put at the end of that.
Amazing paragraph.
And then we start talking about the Oasis reunion. Does it depress you that we've learned nothing from Britpop with the clamour for tickets and the clamour around the laddish culture around Oasis? Is that disappointing in some way that like 20 years on we've not really moved on?
I mean, I don't think, I mean, now to me, you know, Oasis are like, it would be like me in the 80s going, oh, I don't know, Nick Cayman is playing at Wembley. No, what I'm saying is, you know, fair play. Like, there's an audience that wants to go to a stadium gig because it's like, you know...
It's a stadium gig, isn't it? It's not...
Absolutely, and I think, I don't care, you know, go for it. It's completely not on my radar, and it wasn't then. My slight disappointment is I do see people who I think should know better, personally, who... They seem obsessed with that. You know, everything is, I don't know if it's the influence of social media that you have to take a photo of yourself with, you know, 500,000 other people before the music has any fucking validity. But that seems to be the thing. It's like, it's events, right? Yeah. It's not really about music, right? I went to Glastonbury because I did a book talk. I mean, they pay fucking nothing, let me just tell you. You do get free tickets, and my son really wanted to go. But anyway, I went along, and I'm there, and the number of people I knew who were like, oh, you know, we were like 8 hours in the field, you know, getting our spot to watch Elton John, and I'm like, why would you possibly want to do that? And also loads of people who are like, you know, loads of people I met, I've been to Glastonbury, I come every year, right? And I'd be like, all right, so what other gigs do you go to? Right? And to me, that is someone who, hey, you like events, fill your boots. You don't like music. You're not interested in music. If you were, you would go and see something in a different context. And I just think, you know, 90% of there'll be loads of people who saw Oasis back in the day and they want to take their, you know, 18-year-old kid or whatever, and it's their youth, and you know, they want to celebrate that. Fuck it, I don't care. But I just think, just bores me witless,
Yeah.
just the very thought of it. I can't imagine wanting to be anywhere less.
It bored me in the 90s. I was a university student, it bored me then.
Yeah, half as, like, you know, how many tens of thousands of lads bellowing along to Wonderwall. Like, I just, it's not where I want to be. But I don't want to be a snob about it. I absolutely get it that other people do. But I do find some of the people around me where I think, oh, I thought you'd know better than that. But, you know.
Yeah.
But,
Cool. Any other questions, guys? No? Okay.
I just think, sorry, just
Let's-
talking
yeah,
about,
go
going
for
back
it.
to talking
Go
about
for it.
venues and is it, I mean, how much is it that the fact that bands are playing the bigger venues is because they're not getting the receipts via kind of selling records, so there's that pressure to actually fill bigger and bigger venues, whereas back in the day in the 80s, you know, people were buying records and vinyl and that kind of thing, so maybe bands were getting a larger percentage of their income from record sales as opposed to kind of filling bigger and bigger venues.
I mean, I think the real issue to me is that the model has fallen apart, right? Because, you know, I mean, I only came in, you know, midstream, so I came into it in the 80s, just even going as a punter, right? But already then you had, like, you know, independent labels that had been set up, they were successful, like I said, there was a whole network of, you know, I mean, God, if you look back at the sort of punk era, a lot of those, you know, as much as it might have come out of like any kind of rock scene or an American, you know, MC5 type whatever, a lot of it was just pub rock. It was venues, you know, where people could play. And a lot of that infrastructure has gone. And certainly in London, you know, people, oh God, every place is constantly under threat of being turned into luxury flats and blah, blah, blah. You haven't got anywhere to play, there's no fucking network. So I do think that part of the reason why I'm doing this band, you know, is I tried it with Peroshka. I was like, oh, okay, you know, you've got Bella Union, who are a lovely label, you know, oh yeah, album's going to come out, we're going to do this single, like no singles anymore, it's just, we're going to release a track, you know, okay, whatever that means. You sit there and everybody is fucking holding their breath, waiting for Six Music to play you. 3 plays, 4 plays, handful of gigs, it's all fucking over. And you think, fuck me, we spent like 8 months making that record and it's gone. And I thought, I'm not doing it anymore. I'm just going to fucking play gigs when I feel like it. 6 months before the record comes out, or 2 years before the record comes out, I don't care. We're going to play, we're going to write songs, we're going to play them live. If by the time the record comes out, we've moved on and we're not playing those songs anymore, tough shit. Should have come and seen us earlier, right? and yeah, we'll put it out to Six Music. I will tell you now, I will predict we will probably get 2 plays on Gideon Co. I reckon, you know what I mean, and nothing else, right? Because that's the way it works now. So to me, it's like, go out, do the thing that you enjoy doing, you know, find some little club, get there under your own steam. And, you know, we played in Europe, there's lots of little places, there's lots of grassroots places of people who love music, but this kind of, oh, you know, South by Southwest want you to come up, Glastonbury want you to play, yeah, they'll pay you 80 quid, right? Fuck 'em, I'm not doing it, you know what I mean? You know, and I'm not, you know, hoiking my arse to Primavera to pay for 150 quid to, you know, a room this size. I'd rather play a gig in Portugal with someone who actually gives a shit about music, you know what I mean? Who'll at least find me a fucking room that I could sleep in that night. So I just think that it needs to start again, you know, and people will build it up, and I'm sure that people will build up publications and venues and, you know, labels, but it's been kind of, you know, it's been magpied, and now, yeah, you know, if you're Oasis, of course, God, if people are offering you that kind of money, of course you're going to do it, you know, I don't blame them. I wouldn't do it, but...
Cool.
So despite all those challenges you faced, especially with the US record label in the 90s, where would you rather be starting out? If Lush could start in the 2020s or go rewind back to when it did start, which is the better model for Lush, do you think?
I mean, for Lush, I think we were just very lucky. You know, I think where we started suited. To be honest with you, if the music industry was like it was by the time Lush had split up, I wouldn't have become a musician.
Right.
I would have done something else because it was so unappealing to me. So I would have found something else to do.
Culturally or financially?
Just the whole setup, the whole pressure, the whole rapid turnover. Come on, you've got to get a fucking song in the top 10. That's not why I joined a band. You know, no one gave a shit about getting in the top 10. And then, you know, fast forward like 8 years and I'm talking to, you know, and bless him, Steve from Pulp, lovely guy. I'm standing in New York and he's going, well, you know, it's really validated us. You know, we've, you know, Common People's number 2, that shows that we're like a real band. And I was like, no, it doesn't. It's got nothing to do with that. You're a fucking great band. Don't use that as the fucking benchmark, you know. And I just think it became a, you know, I'm not interested in that kind of shit. Do you know what I mean? You know, I like books and films and music and things that are just, you know, from different corners. You know, I'm culturally fascinated by those things. I don't like being spoon-fed what's popular and being told to fucking like it, you know. So, no, I don't think I would have joined the band at all if it had happened then.
Thank you.
So is there an album next year?
There is an album next year.
So
Yes.
is that a label or are you just going to...
We're going to put it out on Belly Union.
Oh.
You know, I love Simon and he's been very good to us and, you know, so we'll put it out. I mean, that's why I was laughing because Lanterns of the Lake, what's his face, mixed it. Paul Gregory has mixed this album, so he's in Lanterns of the Lake. So I feel bad because we missed each other. He's from Newcastle, we played Newcastle last night and then just passed each other, yeah. So, but
yeah, that's where I was going to wrap up actually, is exactly that question. I believe you've got like about an album's worth of material, haven't you? Because you're playing new material at the moment with
yes,
Berenyi Trio.
playing the whole album, yes.
Yeah, fantastic. So is it all recorded and done and ready to...
It's done, mastered,
Right.
everything, all done, yeah.
Okay, fantastic.
I'm still getting fucking typos on the album cover artwork.
Okay.
But yeah, so it'll be out next year.
Awesome.
Like I
Fantastic.
say, three plays on Gideon Cone. I'm going to see if Ladbrokes do bets on that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think you've got a perfect mindset around it. It's like whatever will be, right? So that,
Yeah.
and that's how you need to approach these things.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
On behalf of everyone, thank you so much, Miki, Berenyi, for doing this.